Education is not a privilege, but a human right that allows individuals to exercise their freedoms to the fullest extent. However, for centuries, African Americans were denied educational opportunities equal to those of their white counterparts until 9 black students desegregated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. These students, Mindajine Brown, Elizabeth Eckford, Ernest Green, Thelma Mothershed, Melba Patillo, Gloria Ray, Terrence Roberts, Jefferson Thomas, and Carlotta Walls, became nicknamed and revered as the Little Rock Nine. The Little Rock Nine were tragically blocked from entering Central High School but triumphed with the help of federal aid. Yet, their persecution continued in the halls of the school as they were harassed by their white peers, though their persistence was rewarded with the graduation of Ernest Green. Finally, they were confronted with devastation when the public schools were closed by the governor, but nonetheless, the schools were reopened the following year. Jim Crow legislation prevailed during the 20th century and prevented African Americans from voting, using the same public facilities as whites, and attending integrated schools. The doctrine of separate but equal dictated daily life for African Americans for over 50 years until it was challenged on May 17, 1954 by the Supreme Court's decision regarding the case Brown v. Board of Education, in which school segregation was ruled unconstitutional. However, this ruling lacked regulations regarding when schools would desegregate and at what rate, leaving these decisions to lower courts and individual school districts. To comply with the ruling, on May 24, 1955, the Little Rock School Board unanimously accepted a plan of gradual desegregation to be implemented in Central High School in the fall of 1957. The plan, nicknamed the Blossom Plan after Superintendent Virgil Blossom, cited a need to build more schools to accommodate integration and for desegregation to be gradual. However, in reality, these claims were ploys disguising an intent to delay the mandate and resist desegregation. To carry out the plan, the students who would integrate Central High were chosen from a pool of 200 potential candidates based on criteria such as health, conduct, achievement, intelligence, and even the shade of their skin, resulting in the selection of the Little Rock Nine by the school board. Prior to entering Central High School, the Little Rock Nine's pursuit of desegregation was tragically hindered by resistance presented on local and state levels. On the first day of school, September 4, 1957, the 9 students were faced with an angry mob of students and parents that spat on them and shouted obscenities and threats. Parts of the mob were organized by citizens' councils, organizations established by whites throughout the South to obstruct the implementation of the court's ruling in Brown v. Board. Members of these councils heckled the school board, organized rallies and boycotts, and lobbied public officials, especially Governor Orval Faubus, ultimately polarizing the community in Little Rock. They saw their sentiments reflected in the state government when Governor Faubus ordered the Arkansas National Guard to bar the Little Rock Nine from entering Central High, infamously becoming a national symbol of racial segregation. Fearing for their safety, the black students were forced to turn back, threats and slurs following them as they left. However, the Little Rock Nine refused to be intimidated and would return again, this time with aid from the federal government. By using the Arkansas National Guard to prevent the desegregation of Central High School, Governor Orval Faubus had violated the ruling in Brown v. Board of Education. The federal government demonstrated its support of Brown v. Board and the Little Rock Nine's agenda when it ordered Faubus to remove the troops by means of an executive order on September 20th. After another unsuccessful attempt to enter the school, President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized the deployment of 1,200 members of the 101st Airborne Division into Little Rock and placed the Arkansas National Guard under federal control. With the help of federal troops, the 9 African American students triumphantly surpassed the mob and attended their first full day of classes on September 25, 1957. Eisenhower's action solidified the Supreme Court's ruling and demonstrated that no individual nor state could be above the decision of the Supreme Court. As President Eisenhower stated in a press release,
"Our personal opinions about the decision have no bearing on the matter of enforcement. The very basis of our individual rights and freedoms rests upon the certainty that the President and the executive branch of government will support and ensure the carrying out of the decisions of the federal courts."
Although the Little Rock Nine successfully attended their first full day of classes at Central High School and would continue to do so for the rest of the year, they had not seen the last of resistance to integration. Seldom did a day pass throughout the school year in which the 9 black students were not taunted, tripped, threatened, or physically attacked by their white peers, despite the soldiers that accompanied them to each class. Thus, much of the harassment occurred where the guards could not follow, including the gym, locker rooms, and bathrooms. There, the Little Rock Nine became the target of spitballs, acid, and glass. Furthermore, this harassment followed the students home through phone calls, burning crosses, and bombs, as evident in the bombing of the Walls household in February of 1960. Despite the constant abuse they faced, the Little Rock Nine practiced nonviolent resistance as they had been taught by members of the NAACP in a workshop prior to the start of the school year. However, Minnie Jean could no longer ignore her aggressors and was suspended in December and expelled in February for standing up to her white peers. Fortunately, the other 8 members of the Little Rock Nine successfully attended classes for the entire 1957 to 1958 school year. At the end of the school year, Ernest Green, the sole black senior, became a symbol of the Little Rock Nine's success when he graduated in the spring of 1958. The very presence of Green and the other black students made it impossible for the public to ignore the issue of racial desegregation in public schools. Under the presence of multiple assassination threats, Green was advised to have his diploma mailed to him. However, Green refused to concede to the threats and accepted his diploma alongside his white peers amid bomb dogs, sniper patrols, and security helicopters. Following Ernest Green's graduation, tragedy arose when Governor Orval Faubus closed all public high schools in Little Rock for the 1958 to 1959 school year with the support of the Little Rock community's vote. Faubus claimed that this was necessary in order to avoid the disturbance created by the mobs. Wealthy white students were sent to private schools while those who could not afford them, including the Little Rock Nine, took classes by mail and television, enrolled in schools outside of Little Rock, or in worst cases, did not receive schooling at all that year. The closing of the public high schools affected nearly 4,000 students, both white and black. Once again, triumph stemmed from the federal government when the United States Supreme Court forced the reopening of Little Rock public schools on August 12, 1959, allowing integration to continue. With the support of the government, most of the Little Rock Nine were able to return to integrated high schools, and 3 of them graduated from Central High. The success of the Little Rock Nine brought nationwide attention to the integration crisis. Their persistence and courage in the face of violence inspired blacks throughout the nation to stand up against those who refused them equal rights, fueling the civil rights movement.
It set the context for civil rights activism in the 1960s. In 1960, Little Rock experienced sit-ins. In 1961, it experienced freedom rides. In 1963, it desegregated most of its downtown public facilities.
The Nine not only encouraged fellow members of the civil rights movement, but also compelled the federal government to assist in the enforcement of integration in response to the resistance posed by the white mobs and the state government of Arkansas. Eisenhower's actions squashed the idea that Governor Faubus, the states, or any individual could be above the ruling of the Supreme Court, setting an important precedent. Furthermore, the courage and dignity of the 9 teenagers in the face of blatant racism and violence provided the nation with images of the immorality of segregation. Although the presence of school integration is undeniable in today's world, some schools still retain disparities and do not reflect the racial makeup of the communities they serve, even those in Little Rock where the initial school desegregation process began.
If you look at Little Rock schools today, they are mostly African American, the public schools. Over 2/3 are African American, even though the city is around 50-50 white African American. The school district today is effectively resegregated.
Furthermore, schools today do not just contain inequalities in the racial makeup, but also in the quality of education and access to resources, particularly in schools that are majority-minority. According to a study by the Department of Education, districts serving the highest amounts of minority students consistently receive 15% less funding per student than districts with higher white populations. The Little Rock Nine led their charge against segregation in public schools through selfless action in the face of adversity and were undeterred by the resistance they faced. These 9 African American teenagers were tragically hindered by their white neighbors and municipal and state governments until the federal government took action to uphold the ruling of the Supreme Court. Sadly, even once the 9 students successfully entered Central High School, they still faced incessant harassment in and out of school. However, the Little Rock Nine persevered and by force of character endured relentless abuse and attended classes for the entire school year of 1957 to 1958, ending with the graduation of Ernest Green. Tragically, the following year, the governor closed the public schools of Little Rock until they were successfully reopened by the force of the Supreme Court. The 9 students were successful in desegregating Central High School, and in doing so, they broadcasted the reality of segregation and forced the American public to accept the new reality of integration, blazing a trail for the integrated schools of today. Although schools have made tremendous progress since the days of the Little Rock Nine, many American students are still not exposed to diversity in their classes, and schools that are majority-minority continue to have fewer resources. Thus, the triumphs and tragedies of the Little Rock Nine serve as a reminder not just of freedoms won, but of battles to come.
Do you feel it's worth it going through this?
Yes, I do.